Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Melinda Smith, and I am the Vice Provost of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and the Associate Vice President, Research, EDI at the University of Calgary. It is my honor to welcome you to our webinar to mark the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. The 2023 theme of the International Day focuses on the urgency of combating racism and racial discrimination, marking 75 years since the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Since the Sharpeville massacre in South Africa and the October 26, 1966 UN General Assembly's proclamation on March 21st as the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the global community has mobilized on this day to mark the ongoing efforts to combat racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerances. Since 2001, the UN has incorporated caste as a related intolerance and as part of our ongoing efforts to work collectively to eliminate all forms of discrimination. We are pleased to be collaborating with the University of Alberta once again on the second event in our joint series of educational webinars focused on caste-based discrimination. Today's focus is on the role of educational institutions and the post-secondary sector in particular in combating caste-based discrimination, working to make it a protected ground, and in turn to advancing caste-based equity. Before we continue, and in the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, and reconciliation, I would like to take this opportunity to recognize the land we live, work, and broadcast on today from the University of Calgary, mindful that all of you are joining us from different territories. The University of Calgary is located in the heart of Southern Alberta. We both acknowledge and pay tribute to the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, the Pukonai, and the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bears Paw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. Now I would like to introduce you to Dr. Carrie Smith, the inaugural Vice Provost of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in the Office of the Provost at the University of Alberta. Dr. Smith's research is located at the intersections of feminist activism with creative production and digital culture, including practices, products, politics, theories, and communities. She's the author or co-author of numerous articles and books, including Transverse Disciplines, Queer Feminist, Anti-Racist, and Decolonial Approaches to the University. Please, Dr. Smith.
Thank you so much, Dr. Melinda Smith. I am very pleased to be here in my capacity as inaugural Vice Provost for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the University of Alberta. The University of Alberta respectfully acknowledges that we are located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. What I'd like to do now is focus on our conversation around caste, and then I will invite my colleague from the University of Alberta to talk a little bit about the partnership before we introduce our speakers today. Caste, as many of you know or may not know, is a 2,500-year-old system of division of labor, inequality, and discrimination that continues to shape the lives and life chances of over 1 billion people in any context and space where people from South Asian the South Asian subcontinent live. This is important to our conversation because it also, as we are highlighting, shapes South Asians who are in North America, and particularly South Asians who are in North American higher education institution as well. Efforts to officially make caste a protected category are well underway throughout the United States, but certainly we want to highlight in Canada as well. Most recently, the Toronto School Board voted to make caste a protected ground. And we also note that in the United States, Brown University, following universities in California and elsewhere, amended its policy on non-discrimination to include a specific clause that prohibits caste-based discrimination. And on February 11, Seattle became the first city to explicitly ban discrimination on the basis of caste. So this is actually an important moment for us to be having this conversation. The conversation is vital to educational institutions across Canada. And as I said, not surprisingly, because South Asians constitute the largest and fastest growing group of visible minority population in Canada, as well as international students at our respective universities, at University of Calgary and University of Alberta. So more information about these can be found on our event website. Now I want to turn the virtual floor over to Dr. Carrie Smith.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Smith. So in recognition of this very specific form of structural inequality represented by the caste system, the University of Alberta and the University of Calgary are collaborating on a project around caste-based discrimination with interrelated objectives. To firstly raise awareness and develop educational opportunities for the campus communities and broader publics to learn about caste-based discrimination. This is being done through educational webinars on caste, gender, and intersectionality, of which today's event is an important part. And further, to begin consultation with the respective campus communities to explore non-discrimination policy to make caste a protected ground for both institutions. This is an essential next step of our collaboration together. Thank you.
Now I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce our speakers while you're all here. You're joining us today from wherever you are around the world, who are leaders, activists, scholars, and transformers in this work. We will begin with Shika Dikwaka, who is among those who are trying to make the caste struggle legible and a protected category in North American universities and other spaces. And she, along with the other panelists, will offer insight on how caste operates in everyday environments, how the speakers organize for social institutional change, and what you can do to affect change. Shika Dikwaka is a doctoral candidate in the Department of Integrated Studies in Education at McGill University. Shika's research focuses on Dalit feminism, identity, anti-caste discourse, higher education policies, action research, and narrative inquiry. Her work bridges women's empowerment, intersectionality, and caste at the global level, and analyzes the role and impact of Dalit women's identities on their experiences in higher education institutions in India. So I will introduce all the speakers, and then we will have them, they will follow in the order in which I'm presenting. Following Shika, then, we are joined by a panelist from a caste oppressed community in South Asia. To protect their identity, will be referred to the next presenter only as Usada, who has extensive professional experience spanning the corporate, government, and nonprofit sectors prior to attending graduate studies in North America. For the last 2 years, they have been engaged in making caste a protected category at their university. Their research reviews developments, programs with an anti-caste lens. Our third speaker is Nepali grassroots community organizer Prem Pariya. Prem is a caste equity organizer in Equality Labs and the California State University. East Bay alum. Prem has more than 15 years of university of experience working in the grassroots community and is one of the student leaders helping to make caste a protected category at California State University. He's an elected delegate to the National Association of Social Workers California chapter, and currently serves as the Human Relations Commissioner in Alameda County, California. Closing out today's presentation is Dr. Shaista Aziz Patel. Dr. Patel is a scholar of critical Muslim studies in the Department of Ethnic Studies at the University of California, San Diego. Her research touches diverse areas of interest, such as critical Muslim studies, transnational studies, critical Indigenous studies, South Asian studies, and Black feminist studies. Dr. Patel's work revolves around questions of multiple colonialisms, caste, race, and Muslimness in both the political and academic spheres. Her publications in journals like Feral Feminisms re-examine what we know and have yet to learn about gender, religion, capitalism, and relations of power. I would now like to turn over the virtual floor to our guest speakers. Please welcome Shika Diwaka. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melinda, for that introduction. And I really appreciate this opportunity. And also, I'm so honored to present in a panel with amazing panelists. So thank you so much. I'm Shikha Devakar, a PhD candidate at McGill University, situated on the traditional territory of Kanyen'kehá:ka, historically known as gathering place for many First Nation. Today, I'm going to talk about caste and student experiences and how it intersects with their experiences, that well-being, basically. I am from Dalit community. I am a first-generation university student as well, and an international student. How we as an international student are seen as a homogeneous group, and our challenges are seen as challenges of all international student as a person of color. It often invisibilizes us who are coming from a marginalized communities, from these diverse spaces to these diverse campuses. And I often emphasize on the fact that unless we truly understand the diversity that exists in a classroom in these campuses, we won't be able to move forward towards creating more inclusive spaces. And thank you for this amazing collaboration that University of Alberta and Calgary are taking forward to make curriculum informed around caste. So many studies talks about how heightened awareness of identity differences among students positively impact engagement, participation, student feels seen, and it impacts their self-efficacy and sense of social belongingness. However, despite having a significant number of South Asian students, most of us are not aware what caste identity is. So people know what caste is, but how it functions is something people struggle to understand. To make it more relatable for people who do not understand what caste is an identity, like how we live our gender every day. Similarly, we live caste identity every day. However, the difference is for caste privileged people, their caste identity act as a capital. And for caste oppressed community, such as Dalits, their caste does not act as a capital. Like how, I guess we all panelists gonna touch upon those aspects. There are many ways in which caste discrimination or violence manifests itself. And I do not want to put all the experiences of all person of color or international student under the same umbrella, but we'll share a couple of ways. Like how social interaction is significant for students' well-being, having a community, like being an international student, entering these spaces for the first time, sense of belongingness, sense of safety, all this is important for a student well-being. However, relationship within South Asian community are mostly influenced by their caste. And the question is, how does caste influence our relationship? So if you're Dalit, you will be excluded from social group because you are considered, your identity is considered to be impure. So what do you do if you are being excluded because of your identity? Some of us hide our identity. And what happened when we hide our identity? A lot of Dalits and caste oppressed students do not come out as a Dalit, not because we are ashamed of our identity, but because the repercussions such as being excluded. So a lot of us try to fit in and end up navigating spaces and identifying culture through dominant identity lens, which further suppresses our lived experiences or lived reality, leading to further exclusion. So that is why it is very important to understand caste aspect, to understand that diversity that exists in these classrooms. Another way caste manifests is through caste slurs, remarks, and behavior, which are often considered as normal. And these behavior does not remain just in non-South Asian spaces, but it transpire into non-South Asian spaces. So caste issue have the capacity to transpire. I was reading this, recently I read an article by a Dalit woman during Toronto District School Board motion phase, who wrote, and I'm quoting her, "In the 12th grade, a dominant caste boy approached me and said that I would not be sold for even a single penny if I was auctioned for sex because of my dark skin and caste. It was traumatized me for many days." We all agree that how horrible this statement is, because we understand sexism, we understand colorism enough to understand how deeply problematic this statement is. However, but the question is, do we understand caste enough to break this statement down further to understand how casteist this was as well? Recently, I came across an incident where a non-South Asian peer of mine said, "Oh, I look like Bhangi." He was pointing out to his clothes. And I was amazed because Bhangi is one of the Dalit community. Bhangi is one of the Dalit communities, and community name is often used as a caste slur. This person might have thought that, oh, I'm learning a swear word in another foreign language, but he did not understand that this is not a swear word, this is a casteist slur. So I explained this person that the statement was casteist. So how normalization of caste jokes and slur happen within a South Asian spaces that transpire into non-South Asian spaces as well. And this continues to affect Dalits in those closed spaces and affect the well-being of them, whether it's a social well-being or mental well-being. And how are we going to address this? And how are we going to educate our campuses about caste to make students feel safe? We have some hard-hitting questions to address. Thank you so much.
Now I'd like to turn the floor over to our second speaker, Usud.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Greetings, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure, an honor, and joy to be part of today's panel, comprising of some of the bright and courageous Dalit Bahujan scholars and activists. I would also like to thank and congratulate University of Calgary and University of Alberta for thoughtfully organizing these seminars, panels. They are also followed by events around caste throughout this 2023. My heartfelt gratitude for them for setting up a model for other universities to kind of follow what they're doing right now. I would like to cover three themes for my talk. I may not be able to cover it uh, initially, like within the 10 minutes that I have. So might like to take up some of the last theme, especially maybe during the question and answer session. I would specifically address why caste as a protected category is required and how can we see beyond making caste as a protected category. So that's the first theme. The second theme is the role of administrators and faculties across the universities. What role can they play in kind of, foregrounding caste in the scholarship and not just making it as a protected category? You would see the third theme. There's been tremendous energy thanks to the kind of organizing by the anti-caste activists, mostly coming from the caste-based background, is that a lot of Seattle City Council and Toronto District School Board are some of the initial recent examples where caste have become protected category. So this is a tremendous energy that has got generated, and so how can we kind of harvest this energy, and what can be how can this opportunity be utilized, and also what precautions do we need to take? So I'll respond to that, but probably in the second half during the question and answer session. So responding to the first thing, why caste as a protected category is required, and how can we see beyond that? I would address that this is not only necessary, as Shikha rightfully shared some of the horrible examples of how caste-oppressed students face those harassment. But so this is not only required for such caste-oppressed students, even faculties, which we don't have many right now in the North American context at least, to report harassment and bigotry that they face. But it is also important to foreground caste as an assertive civil rights issue. Uh, Even though the research has been done on caste, you would admit that it was limited to seeing caste as a passive social segregation parameter, and it was never seen as an assertive civil rights issue. Something that you can kind of see a parallel to how race and racism is being seen pre civil rights movement and post civil rights movement. So we are kind of standing at that juncture today where caste has been, with a lot of efforts by anti-caste activists, has been brought to that realm of seeing it as a civil rights issue, which these movements across universities will take it to the next level. I hope, that is how it should happen. It is not only necessary to see caste as a protected category within universities, but also see it within other institutions, like, say, corporate, social institutions, or governments, non-profit spaces in the United States, because there are wide area of examples where caste segregation, caste discrimination is happening across housing colonies, across corporate houses like Cisco, across temples like that. So we need to see it beyond university, but certainly universities are starting point because caste is being discussed, research in this parameter in these institutions. So this is the first place, but of course we have to go far beyond that. Imagine how making caste, I could give you a direct example, how making caste as a protected category could benefit caste oppressed students. Imagine somebody sitting in an admissions office in a university. Most of the students who apply to their statement of purposes write usually that I come from South Asia, I come from this particular country. Mostly they are being admitted either by ticking on the column of, say, Asian, South Asian, people of color, person of color, right? Usually the identity, the hidden identity within that, their caste location, something which anthropologists have been calling as minority within minority. That is not, if not overly stated, or even if it is stated, if the person who's reading those admission SOPs, you're not able to relate to it, that person will consider a Dalit Adivasi person applying from South Asia as just another South Asian student. So probably this would be a remarkable step, and that is something me and my colleagues are doing in our universities, is to reach out to our admission office, telling them these nuances, reaching out to them. Because as most of you would agree that we don't have enough Dalit Adivasi caste oppressed students coming from South Asia in our departments. So we need, this could be a stepping stone for that. The second point is we need to create, once caste is acknowledged as a, not only as a protected category, but as a civil rights issue, we would have to create spaces for caste oppressed students to flourish. Because right now, there are no spaces by which they'll feel supported in such environments in university spaces. I'm very sorry to say that. I speak it from my personal experience. As you say in India, how people like Rohit Vemula, very recently Akash Solanki, Payal Tadvi, uh, are they like, have been victims of institutional murders? So not to have another Dalit Adivasi person dying of suicide, we need to create caste as a protected category. And this is a moment to do that. And I'm glad University of Calgary and Alberta are showing a great example by kind of demonstrating. The second point I would address is why what the role that administrators and faculties can play in this. You see, even though this activism is emancipatory for caste oppressed students like me, it entails a lot of risk, right? Because that is one of the reasons why I'm participating as an allies, even though I feel it's important for me and for students who will come after me in these spaces. But we need to create a safe environment for caste oppressed students. Can administrators and faculties help in reducing the risk and ensure safety of students while making caste as a protected category? And there could be issues with visas of international students, safety, advising, legal matters, and of course the mental trauma that comes with taking up a stand, which is still not a kind of a major concern in North American universities or maybe Canadian universities. So imagine somebody who's in a particular department and that person is taking a stand that caste should be made a protected category, but somebody from that own department is kind of opposing this, that this should not happen. What impact would it have on the career of caste officers, right? So this is just one example. And at times I've seen from my personal experience that administrators, somebody who comes from a DI unit or from Office of Equity and Diversity, they tend to act as neutral or play safe because there are people who are supporting caste equity and making caste as a protected category, but there are also equal or probably the larger number of people who are opposing this. So how would you kind of, address these two concerns? Are you just an arbitrator between these two people or these two groups of people? Are you taking a stand? And your neutral stand means you're taking a side of the oppressor and not the side of justice. So that's the second point that I would like to sign, that administrators can play an important role in making caste as a protected category by showing the resolve and kind of, supporting caste oppressors. The faculties, of course, I mean, one of the great concerns you would see today in North American academia is that you have very less number of caste oppressed students, especially in social sciences and humanities. You would find more number in the STEM field, even though we kind of do not appreciate it as much. But there are more students in the caste of STEM field. You do not have equal numbers. Forget about the faculties. You could actually count them on hands, how many caste oppressed faculties are here. So uh, even if you see most of the South Asian area studies department, they haven't really been very forthcoming in making caste as a protected category. So I would really appeal to such students, faculties, maybe from South Asian origin or may not be from that, but not only support making caste as a protected category, but also take Dalit and Adivasi students, caste oppressed students, people from other marginalities, from Kashmir, from Muslims, religion. So those who are underrepresented in academia, take them, groom them, because what you're doing right now is you're theorizing on caste, but you would find most of the people who are doing research work on Buddhism, on Birsa Munda, on Dalit literature are mostly people coming from a particular Savarna background. But you don't have actually, you would hardly find caste-based students doing this kind of research. So it's a kind of appeal to faculty and administrators that do not remain limited and show your kind of resolve, which you haven't really shown it over these last decades and not only years. So I'll stop here for time being and maybe continue the rest of the points later. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for that presentation, and we look forward to more fulsomely engaging with it in the conversation. Now I'd like to present our third speaker, Prem Paraya, who's here. Great, and off you go.
First, I would like to inform you that my internet is unstable due to the weather. So let's hope it will go well. Melinda, thank you for the introduction. I'm Prem Paraya, and I'm the first generation Nepali Hindu Dalit who goes to school from my family. So I want to thank the University of Alberta and University of Calgary for advancing conversations on the problem of caste in the Northern and North American universities. I'm very happy today to talk about my experience in helping to make caste as a protected category in the California State University system. So as our previous speakers, Sikha and Asad, indicated, I will assume that most of the participants have a basic understanding of what caste is and how it works. In brief, I'm one of the estimated 260 million caste-oppressed persons worldwide. Since my childhood, I have witnessed Brahmins who created this system in Hindu scripture, have placed themselves at the bottom of caste system and continue to benefit from centuries of privilege, access, and power because of it. So I came to this country in 2015 as an immigrant for better understanding of me and my family and to flee caste violence. So I thought I would not be discriminated against because of my last name Paraya in America. I'm very proud of my last name and heritage. But unfortunately, even in America, it marks me as an untouchable person, especially in Nepali and Indian diaspora. So once Dr. Ambedkar mentioned that wherever South Asians migrate to other regions on earth, so the caste system would become a world problem. Happening with Nepalese who have migrated to America. Since coming to America, I have experienced microaggressions many times in Nepali diaspora, at my workplace and at the CSU Eastway, where I graduated in 2021. So now let me briefly tell you about my experience as a graduate student in the social work department at CSU Eastway. When I try to report incidences of caste-based discrimination, I learned that caste was not a protected or recognized category, similar to race and gender. When I tried sharing my experience of caste-based discrimination in the class, some of my South Asian colleagues did not validate my experience. Later on, I learned that it was their strategic ignorance. They said, though I'm from South Asia, I do not know this is caste discrimination or there is caste discrimination. While my professors were not aware of the caste system, my South Asian colleagues My South Asian colleagues tried to silence me when they heard my experiences. They began avoiding me and stopped talking with me. Those were very difficult days for me to deal with humiliation. I asked for help with my professors in my department, and they also told me that caste is not a recognized category of protection. I felt disappointed, very disappointed, helpless, and upset, definitely upset. It was then one of my professors introduced me to Thanmari Sundararajan at Equality Lab, who immediately gave me support and hoped to do something about this challenge. After many more consultations with Thanmari and my trusted advisors and friends, we slowly began to educate, organize, and agitate for including caste as one of the protected category at CSU East Bay. In the beginning, caste was an unfamiliar idea and practice for many faculties and fellow students in my university. We had to come up with an effective strategy to educate and persuade at our university on the importance of why caste must matter at CSU East Bay. So for this, we then, with advice and guidance of my faculty and Equality Labs in 2020, we hosted a conference on racism, casteism, and mental health issues during COVID-19 on the occasion of World Mental Health Day in 2020. So this strategy helped us to make allies who became champions for making caste as a recognized category. So our strategy was also to identify supporters, especially departments who were interested in social justice issue. Slowly, I managed to work with a group consisting of departments and diversity, equity, and inclusion committee members who agreed to bring the caste resolution to the academic senate of CSU East Bay. At that point, we realized some of the influential members who happened to be from the so-called high caste groups almost managed to dismiss the entire caste resolution, arguing that caste is India's internal matter. This does not exist in the US, in the California, even in CSU East Bay. Why we are wasting our time? Can you imagine? So in spite of the fierce opposition, the academic senate this resolution unanimously. At that time, I was alone. I was alone to answer all the questions raised in the academic senate. After that, student leaders and faculty members from other California state universities contacted me to help them develop strategies for making caste the protected category in their universities as well. So I worked with the National Academic Coalition for Caste Equity to add caste to the Cali State University system. And I saw how much changes when caste is added as the protected category to non-discrimination policy. So here I want to recognize many who worked with me hard and creatively in this effort. A special thanks to Manmeet Singh, Radhika, and many other student leaders of various campuses for their courage and creativity. It was because of people like them that on January 1st, 2022, the entire CSU system made a historic decision to make caste as the protected category. So this was huge. Definitely this was huge because it not only directly impacted over 23 universities under CSU system and other off campuses, which roughly consist of 500,000 students. It also inspired many universities worldwide. I'm fortunate and proud to have the opportunity to play an important role in this historic effort. The timing of the decision delivered on January 1st, 2022 will be remembered as the best New Year gift for caste-oppressed students, faculty, staff, as well as the best, as well as allies who believe in the idea of equal justice and equal opportunity for all globally. So recently, the city of Seattle added caste as the protected category now. So many of you know that. The Toronto School Board also added caste as the protected category. So as I look ahead, I know we now action plan, caste equity trainings, and much more resources for ending the caste-based system in North American higher education. So I'm encouraged to know that many have begun conversations on making caste as the protected category. I hope University of Alberta and University of Calgary and many other Canadian universities will work on adding caste as the protected category soon. And we'll create safe space for many caste-oppressed students, staff, and faculties. At last, I'm grateful to my professors who supported me at CSU East Bay to add caste as the protected category and all the supporting hands. We have great responsibility to accomplish the unfinished legacy of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Enough is enough. Silence is not the solution. Jai Bhim. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation, and for also reminding us on this day that as Nelson Mandela said, it always seems impossible until it's done. And that long road to freedom is one that we must continue to pursue. So the story, your story of working to make caste-based discrimination a protected ground in the California state system is a remarkable inspiration for all of us who are on this journey for education and for transformation. So thank you so much for that. Next, I would like to turn to our fourth speaker, Dr. Shaista Aziz Patel, who will present to us today. And as I said previously, for those who came in later, she is a critical Muslim studies scholar in the Department of Ethnic Studies at the University of California in San Diego.
Thank you so much, Dr. Melinda Smith, Dr. Dia da Costa, and everybody else who made today possible. I want to begin with saying Assalamu alaikum and Navroz Mubarak to all those of us who are celebrating today as, first of spring, as our new year. I also want to say, thank you so much to Shikha and Ashad and Prem for this powerful Dalit-led anti-caste work, which you all are doing on your various campuses. I think students really are the ones who can bring these changes where us often complacent, and can I also add old faculty members and complicit administrators cannot and often do not want to do anything because we are too comfortable. So I want to spend my 10 minutes, which might go into 12, talking about a particular case related to caste, Islamophobia, and the Indian occupation of Kashmir. In anti-caste conversations, and I've said this before too many times, there's often a lack of an intersectional analysis. Caste supremacy works in tandem with Islamophobia, class politics, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, nationalisms, and coloniality. And I see a strong line of thought emerging in anti-caste work in diaspora in North America, which leaves the Brahminical supremacy of the Indian state intact. In this moment of genocide of Indian Muslims, of the over 400-year occupation of Kashmir, of ongoing occupation of the Northeast in the settler colonial state of India, I cannot talk about caste equity or make the harmful argument that caste works the same way in other religions as it does in Hinduism. It does not. So let me give but one example of where caste, coloniality, and Islamophobia come together in our universities. So on September 14th, an anonymous Twitter thread from this handle called settler_scholar, identifying themselves as a group of Kashmiri activists, students, and researchers, published their allegations of unethical research ethics by an anthropologist at a large public university system in the US. Their tweets alleged that Dr. Saiba Verma, an Indian anthropologist based at the University of California, San Diego, where I'm based as well, adopted unethical research practices for writing her book on the trauma of colonized Kashmiris. The Occupied Clinic, Care and Militarism in Kashmir, her book title, was published by Duke University Press in the United States. And it was this book that secured Saiba Verma, her tenure in the University of California system, which comprises of 10 campuses across California. According to this Twitter thread, Verma's father, Krishan Verma, was an integral part of India's intelligence and espionage establishment and spent his career as an agent in RAW, India's research and analysis wing. So its equivalent would be CIA in the context of the US. And Krishan Verma was the director of Aviation Research Center, a technical wing of RAW, India's foreign intelligence agency. In the 1990s, that's when he was stationed there, which was also one of the bloodiest decades of colonial violence in Indian occupied Kashmir. On September 19th, just 5 days after the release of the initial Twitter thread, diasporic North American Kashmiri scholars and others working on Kashmir released a statement expressing their concern over Verma's unethical research practices in Kashmir and on Kashmiris. Prominent Kashmiri Muslim scholars and other signatories noted that while they do not believe that the daughter should be punished for the sins of the father, the revelations about her father's position in RAW, however, raise key questions about the ethical obligations for all scholars who do ethnographic and archival work in Kashmir, with particular relevance for scholars who are committed to supporting the Kashmiri political struggle. It is a clear breach, they say, it is a clear breach of ethical responsibility for the researcher to not disclose or to misrepresent intimate family links with the colonial state, as Saiba Verma did. It is really difficult to believe Saiba Verma's claims in response, where she states that her father, and I quote her here, never enabled any connections or contacts in the field, end of quote, because in the acknowledgement section of her dissertation, she thanks her father for, and I quote her again, opening up both Kashmir and the world of documents to me, that is to Saiba Verma, with his own care, end of quote. There is the matter of Verma designing a research study for her dissertation, which progressed into a book that won her tenure at UCSD, which was based on collecting data from Kashmiris in a public psychiatric hospital in Srinagar. A 2015 report titled Kashmir Mental Health Survey, conducted by Doctors Beyond Borders, presents a seriously grim picture of the mental health of colonized Kashmiri Muslims. I'm still wondering how it is that nobody asked Saiba Verma about the ethics of undertaking such a project of sitting in on counseling sessions between Kashmiri patients and doctors, especially given that she is from a dominant caste Indian anthropologist. She is a dominant caste Indian anthropologist. In one of her many interviews about her book, Saiba Verma notes, and I quote her here, "When I went to Kashmir on a preliminary fieldwork trip in 2008, I went with only a vague idea of what I wanted to study. I did as anthropologists do. I desperately called and tried to connect with as many people as I could through mutual friends," end of quote. The fact that her network of people in Kashmir did not know about her intimate ties with RAW aside, what allows a colonizer to venture into the territory of the colonized with just an inkling of a project to do with, or rather on the colonized? And I think caste power has allowed her that, idea of a vague idea that then went into becoming her dissertation and later her tenure book. How would we read this if the anthropologist was Israeli with intimate and familiar ties to the IDRF and gained easy access to Gaza with a vague idea of working on or with Gazans? would those of us on the left be equally forgiving and come to the defense of the Israeli anthropologists who hid their very familial connections with the genocide industry of Israel? Why are neither Kashmir nor the casteist and Islamophobic Indian genocide industry and its little Eichmanns legible in these seemingly progressive circles? There is an entire book of research ethics that can be dedicated to the Verma matter, as some of us have come to call it. I cannot disclose the many details right now, as I and my colleague, another racialized woman academic at UCSD, Dr. Wendy Matsumra, are fighting a complaint launched by Verma using the university resources that are meant to support discriminated scholars and students on our campus. Verma's complaint against me, Professor Wendy Matsumra, who is faculty in Department of History at UCSD, and the Critical Gender Studies program from which Verma was disaffiliated in light of her allegations of unethical research practices, was launched with OPHD, which is the Office for the Prevention of Harassment and Discrimination. According to the complaint letter, which we received on April 5th, 2022, Verma alleged that, and I quote her here, she says that I described the complainant, that the Saiba Verma, as racist, as a colonizer researcher, and as a Savarna. Now, those of us who are familiar with any anti-caste work, we know that Savarna is not a slur. It just means, people who are with caste. So that those of us who are, Dalit are Avarna or without caste. Okay. And it also says that I was disparaging complainants' national identity and ancestries. For readers not familiar with caste, think about this in terms of race. Can a Black scholar calling out unethical research practices and partnership with the carceral industry of a white scholar ever be called a reverse racist? I have been burdened with defending myself for a complaint that the university should have either refused to file or easily dismissed in the first place for its absurdity. The complaint not only made us vulnerable where the top administrator of the university was concerned, but we also received hostile letters from colleagues from other departments. There was silent and active disapproving of our accountability endeavors, dismissed ungenerously as insecurity, that we were insecure of Verma, though why would we be having the same job, same books, whatever, much ethical and better scholarship, obviously, and generously as our political work. It made us into non-serious professors who did not understand the civility and responsibility attached to being on tenure track or tenured faculty at an important American university. This hostility was also from people in departments that teach students radical histories of solidarity and prepare to do anti-colonial work with indigenous peoples in North America and Palestine. But when it came to calling out a woman of color like Saiba Verma, one was the lack of understanding of what caste is and what the bloodied, casteist, and Islamophobic occupation of Kashmir means. Then many of these colleagues were objective because Kashmir is not yet a trend or a site of career for most non-Kashmiris, like Palestine is for non-Palestinians. For them, when it came to Kashmir matter, respectable anti-colonial academic work was supposed to remain objective, even if we clearly know that objectivity is absolutely supposed to serve the racist, colonial, and casteist states and their institutions like universities. Anti-caste work cannot happen until and unless the Brahminical settler state of India disintegrates. And that is hard to hear, but this is what needs to be done. I'm just going to close with this last paragraph, which for me is really important. I mean, the issue is that a speaking and litigious Dalit cannot be seen. And that's what it came down to in terms of Saiba Verma launching this absurd complaint against us. So what I am saying about Saiba Verma is not meant to portray her as exceptionally deceptive, exceptionally colonial, or exceptionally complicit in casteist Indian colonialism in Kashmir. It is a question I'm raising in relation to all Indian Savarna academics with long lists of awards and accolades, including tenure, granted on the basis of their writings about decolonization and abolition, but whose progenitors were in prominent positions in the administrative and military wing of Indian occupation in Kashmir, but also other territories in northeast of colonizing India, such as Assam, Nagaland, Manipur, Tripura, and Chhattisgarh. These academics as yet have anything to say about being the flesh and blood of the colonizers of the world's most brutally militarized zone of Kashmir. And yet they can write and teach against colonialism and the prison industrial complex in North America and be recognized as radical thinkers when it is literally their familial relations with colonizers that presents the world as a gift, all for their taking. What does it mean to hail dominant caste Indian scholars as radicals, as allies, as abolitionists, and as people with whom we want to build decolonial futures in North America? I am absolutely not willing to give them any cover or allow them any innocence. Okay, I'll end with this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation, which brings to a close our four speakers who have provided wide-ranging comments that are relevant and pertinent to the issues we grapple with in university, and especially salient on this International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, where we think about not just when we think about racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerances, but also the importance of how to think through this in a complex and intersectional way. So before we go into the question, I want to so thank you to the four presenters. Now is an opportunity to have a conversation with the speakers. But before we do that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Dia Da Costa, who will be helping to guide today's Q&A. She has been an inspiration behind much of this work for many years before we've actually began hosting these educational forum. So I would like, and as we note on the event website, Dr. Da Costa is a professor in Educational Policy Studies Department at University of Alberta's Faculty of Education. Her research is extensive and focuses on transnational feminist and anti-colonial approaches to state violence and development discourse. Dr. Da Costa has collaborated with activist groups in India for nearly 25 years, as well as in the diaspora, and it has guided her in blurring the boundaries between theory and practice. I will now turn over the virtual floor to Dr. Dia Da Costa to join us, but also to be opening up the Q&A with our audience.
Thank you, Dr. Smith, and thank you for pouring the resources of your offices to you and to Dr. Carrie Smith at U of A to do this crucial work in the face of what will be a lot of challenge, no doubt. Some of which was so wonderfully laid out and vividly laid out by Prem and Shikha and Ashar, as well as Dr. Shaista Patel. The challenges are very, very real. Caste slurs are real. The fact that we have so few professors from non-dominant castes in the academy, that is real, and that is evidence. There's evidence all around us, from Alberta to California, back to Nepal and India, but especially in India. So I'm going to bring in the questions at this point. If that's okay, I'll ask the first question and then, okay. This question is to, well, to all of you, but here's what it says. Dr. Periyar described that so much changed when caste was recognized as a protected category. I'm wondering if he could say more about what changed. How did having explicit recognition that caste discrimination is prohibited discrimination stop this discrimination from happening?
Thank you so much, Nicole, for this wonderful question. Yeah, definitely, so let me explain with my one personal experience, So before having explicit recognition of caste, I was like, when I reached out to my professors for the help, that time I was answered that there is no recognition of caste. So people were not aware of that. So now when I reached out to other caste oppressed students, and students like, at my university, they were not comfortable. They were always, hiding identity. Now there is explicit recognition of caste, and many more students, not only at CSU, worldwide, now they are coming out as caste oppressed students, caste oppressed faculties, caste oppressed staff, right? And they are starting to write many more op-eds and sharing their experiences, how they were discriminated. So this is the change. This is the change. So before this, people, they did not have confidence. They did not have confidence. They did not have hope to get justice. Now they have hope. They are optimistic to get justice. If they are discriminated based on their caste identity, so there is university has a mechanism to address that. So I think, did I answer this question or not? I think, yeah.
If other speakers want to add to that too, that would be great. Shaista, I think you have, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Prem, for that response. I just want to say that, wasn't it just like a few years ago that, Prime Minister Trudeau, I'm also from Canada, but, Trudeau said something like, I'm intersectional or something, that's how he framed it. And so, I think caste equity work is really important. I think caste needs to be recognized because, like I said, in the context of Cyber Verma, we are both seen as South Asians, we are both seen as brown. They were like, what's the issue? Is this like a familial fight between you two? And I'm like, no, it's like, worlds apart, like there's a whole apartheid between us. But, I think along with that, while we are working on caste equity, let us not forget about caste abolition, because and one of the best ways of doing the caste abolition work is through education. So even thinking about, what does it mean to bring caste into, to bring caste through Dalit feminist literature? I want to say that because, all the Savarna scholars have now jumped on the bandwagon of anti-caste work. And it just makes me very suspicious of them, and rightly so. And so I just want to say that, make sure that along with fighting for that, you're also making space for educating people about what caste is and what caste apartheid is, and also what, Dalit feminist literature is. There is this whole world of beautiful, powerful Dalit literature. I was just teaching this 2 weeks ago to my grad class, and, Baburao Bagol, this Dalit writer, has this line that Dalit literature is human literature, and that is so powerful. So let us also make space for education, because, legal stuff can take us only so far. Thanks.
Anyone else want to jump in here? Okay. So, Dia, did you want to follow up, or should I go ahead?
No, please go ahead.
Okay, so thank you all for that. And one of the things that I think is really important in this conversation, and I like the caste equity is a civil right, and also the discussion around equal opportunities, but as Shaista said, going beyond these kinds of initiatives where caste is abolished. And I guess I wonder if you would want to comment on that journey from why equal opportunity, for example, is not just enough, why caste as a civil right or even a protected ground might be an important start, but actually that's part of a journey towards something that is much more robust, and what that more robust would look like, especially in a post-secondary education institution where the assumption is this is a space where we are all or ought to be equitable, but we know in practice it isn't. So I would like to, since all of us are in universities, for us to think about what universities need to be doing in order to advance this conversation. And I know, Shaista, you began with this, with the educational piece, but all of you have been doing this work already within institutions.
Is it okay to invite Ashad to talk about this, because I'm reading their book chapter for our book, and they have such amazing stuff to say about it. All of you do, but I just wanted to bring them in because
Yes.
yeah.
Each of you can speak to, yes. Because it matters too whether you're a student or you're an undergraduate, PhD, or faculty too, I would imagine.
Yeah, can I quickly respond to Dr. Godley's question? I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, but I really appreciate, and I'll come to this point, Dr. Smith, is that Dr. Godley says, I assume, is that if what can be done if you have Dalit students who are encountering problem from their South Asian supervisors who come from caste privilege, and I would say that if you could sense, if they could find that space with you to go and approach you to share these kind of experiences, I'm sure they find some sort of ally or support system in you. So I think the first thing I would say, somebody who could is take them, be in your committee. I mean, be on their committee and probably support their work, listen to them. Because I remember, like, I have such fortunately been kind of supported by professors coming from non-South Asian backgrounds, from different countries, not only from US, and they make it a point to listen to me. I remember one of my professors asking me, Vishal, happy Diwali, and then and they kind of asked me, is it all right if I wish you happy Diwali? So then I told them that there's anti-caste critique to how Diwali is being celebrated. And then I shared these experiences about that. So I think a good thing about somebody who's not completely aware of these kind of dynamics is to be asking questions, to inquire, and not to take things for granted. So I would really appreciate people like Godley, to whom students are approaching, to take them in the committee, support them, listen to them, and kind of harness that scholarship.
So I'm just going to give a different angle into my question, because one of the things that was really powerful with each of the presentations, especially for people who think of, I know in the United States, there's this language of Asian, and it's really just it's homogenizing. In Canada, the South Asian population is the fastest growing, but also the largest, but it's also extremely complex. And so this conversation in this panel has disrupted the homogeneity, but it's also raised some interesting questions about first generation, second generation, third generation. It has also raised issues around the ways in which international students, for example, might be iterated into this conversation and differently, and ways that actually obscure the kinds of inequities. And so one of the questioners wanted to know what we need to do to think differently, not to hold, maybe not to hold hands, but we are interested in education. What we need to think differently in order to disrupt this tendency for this homogeneity, especially among the South Asian population, which is, as I said, very diverse and very complex. And you're talking about over 1 billion people. I mean, honestly, why are we having this conversation now?
Making caste, even the question of caste equity, caste abolition, legible or visible in diaspora, it is the work of Dalit organizers and followed by Dalit scholars. And so I know that Prem mentioned Tenmuri Sundararajan, who is the executive director of Equality Labs, and she has and Equality Labs have done so much work before mostly, especially in diaspora, before anti-caste Savarna scholars who've written entire books, and you look at their index, there's no caste, and suddenly now they're experts on caste. So let's give due credit to Dalit feminists, because anti-caste movement needs to be led by Dalit feminists, and the guidance should always be taken from them. I think one of the important things I think is for people, and I know Dia and I wrote about this in our article last year about why we cannot collaborate along caste lines, power differentials that are produced along caste lines. I mean, to also think about this whole apartheid that is between us two, brown people who sound the same, whatever, is thinking about caste as a vertical system of hierarchy rather than just lateral violence, that it's horizontal systems of relation. I know many of the scholars who are in social sciences and humanities are very taken with Professor Jody Bird's, who's a Chickasaw scholar, her idea of horizontal relations of power, which is important, but let's not mistake and think that, coloniality in the context of Kashmir, for example, is brown people killing brown people, occupying brown people. It is not. Or that, we understand hierarchies only when it's placed along the binaries that can be visible to the eye. And so I think we really, really need to think about, two things. One, what does it mean to think of caste as a vertical hierarchy of dehumanization? It is one of the oldest systems of dehumanization. And those of us who seriously study it as scholars, we have much to talk about in terms of what that dehumanization means, especially with Black feminist scholars who are also talking about it, like thinking about Zakiya Mann Jackson, her conception of plasticity and all those things. And secondly, I think when white scholars, especially white settler scholars, often, even well-meaning ones see us through the lens of Orientalism. And, for them, India is this, country that is huge, that is so diverse, blah, blah, completely erasing the genocide that is the caste-based genocide that is so old, but also the genocide of Muslims, of indigenous peoples of India. And I think it's really important that they do their homework in terms of who it is that they are partnering with when they want to do these various projects. If you have a feminist scholar who's teaching courses still on Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, and Martin Luther King, I bet you they're Brahmin and you should run away. So yeah.
Dia?
Thank you, Shaista, for always having such clarity on these matters. So I have a question that I'd like to raise from the chat, and hopefully I can entice Shikha to come in to respond here. This question notes again, as Prem did, that B.R. Ambedkar's prophetic remark, if Hindus migrate to other regions on earth, Indian caste would become a world problem. And now the world is witnessing it. I believe in an essentially white country like Canada, and that too in a conservative province like Alberta. Only universities can provide a space for discussion on caste discrimination. In that direction, I took a bold decision to work on Dalit literature and movement at the English department. However, I found it so difficult to find students who are aware of caste issues. So finding students who have a Dalit identity is even more difficult, especially when they're from different disciplines where caste hardly matters. How did activists in the panel address this issue in their contexts?
That's a very important question. And this is a question that I'm still reflecting on, because yes, it's very difficult to identify a student from caste oppressed communities, because as I shared in my presentation, that the repercussions are so high that it is very difficult to come out with our identity. And I would say it's not that students are not aware about caste and caste problem, but there is a whole spectrum of how much you understand, how deeper you understand. And it all reflects on our positionality. For example, me as a Dalit woman coming from a certain region has a very different experiences of caste discrimination in comparison to someone who comes from a different positionality, for example, a Dalit male. So having those kind of positionality gives us different understanding of how caste work. And even if we talk about someone who comes from a caste-dominated background, caste privileged background, they have a very different understanding of how caste function, and it's on a very surface level. So I guess how we answering to question that Melinda raised about how we can make these spaces aware about what we can do. And there was one more question that how can we can be an allyship. So I guess the thing is, starting from educating about caste, well, how caste function. This is a basic question that we are still struggling with. Like a lot of my friends or my peers ask me, the caste discrimination still exists in India. We knew that, oh, caste existed long back, but then it was removed by constitution and what now. Do you still face caste discrimination? So they don't even know at what level caste discrimination still exists. Newspaper media is full of incidents of institutional murders, students facing discrimination. Or in Tamil Nadu, the water tank for Dalit community was dumped with feces so that they don't have clean water to drink. So how untouchability is still practicing in a various ways are the things that we need to really understand, because then only we can understand the how caste discrimination functions, especially in the white, in the spaces which are either predominantly white. Like this person raised a question about how in Alberta, like my department, which is my department in McGill, is, I would say they took steps in understanding caste. My supervisor, my other professor, when they got to know about my research, they took steps. They started reading about caste, they started understanding about caste, and they started having this conversation with me, how we can develop further or take progressive steps in order to make these students safe and make it this spaces inclusive. So these are the conversations which are really important to have with community members, or having a different theoretical framework like Dalit feminists to understand these issues more deeply. I hope I answered the question you raised.
So just, thank you, Saksika. You have, you talked a lot, about this issue. Just I want to add, definitely there is difficulty. And before, working with caste oppressed students, or with community members, we need to know there is intergenerational trauma, right? We need to be familiar about that. So definitely, though I'm from caste oppressed community, so when I was doing my research that time, it was very challenging for me to communicate, to get response from my own community members. So definitely this is the challenge. So we need to work on that, so that we need to have caste competency, right? We need to have more caste competency, and we need to work on that. Thank you.
Can I give a quick plug to Dr. Kumar's question?
Yes.
Yeah, a very quick, yeah. So I really appreciate, Dr. Kumar, your concern that you want to take up, and that is one of the kind of theme that I address, is how can you have more caste oppressed, underrepresented students in academia? So your concern is validated. I really appreciate that. One of the very quick answers to that, I'm sure Prem, Dr. Patel, I'm sure, all of us have list of hundreds of such students who are wanting to work, apply to universities, but they are not finding right supervisors, right advisors with whom they would like to work. So if you really approach us, there are a lot of Ambedkarite organizations, including we can provide that name to you. And they have list of students approaching them, asking for fellowship, asking for right kind of a person. They come from a very diverse background in terms of their education profile. So I think these could be places, our panelists and as well as Ambedkarite organizations who can give you link to kind of, I'm sure I can right away give you 10 names who are like really wanting to study here but not finding space. So yeah, that's what we can answer to that.
Thank you for
Thanks.
that. Mhm.
Are you gonna go, Dia, or do you want me to go?
I would like you to go. I just want to highlight one quick comment where it says, I think this question speaks for itself in terms of the answer, but that's why I want to say it. As one of the Dalit scholars in Alberta, I can attest that we always face microaggressions and discriminatory behavior from non-Dalit South Asians. We usually hear that there is no casteism in Canada, Alberta, but such statements come from non-Dalits. Shouldn't such statements come from Dalits themselves? Therefore, I love Mr. Prem Pariyar's quote saying that this is strategic ignorance.
That's a very powerful, and I hope my question segs somewhat into that in terms of what's not visible to people, in terms of, but it was a thread through all of the presentations, which is that how caste impacts just area studies programs, Asian area studies programs, how it impacts curriculum. And Shaista, you always talk about citational practices, how it impacts who has access to scholarships, who has access to advisors who can shape the kinds of research questions that people want to direct and the topics that get raised within institutions. So I wonder if we can actually focus on just the impact of the kind of the production of knowledge within university and how caste impacts that.
I also spoke about that in my work, Dr. Smith, and I wanted to address more issues. For example, I know a couple of South Asian scholars in my school who worked with Dalit and Adivasi nonprofits in India back home. Their work is very extractive. They work with these organizations to get information, to theorize, and make their careers out of it. But they don't give back anything to these communities. They don't take students from these communities. They don't take, they would hardly have people coming and sharing their experiences. And it's just not an issue of English, it's an issue of intent. So I think because, they do not understand the life world, the struggles that one goes through so as to come here. And there's a lot of risk involved for students, for nonprofits, if their work is misunderstood, misprojected in international terrain. So I think one of the ways is that people are not kind of conscious of these the struggle that nonprofit activists, students come from, and that's why the scholarship is takes away. So there is inequality of risk and access and privilege involved in this process, and that is one thing which is really not letting the real issues come up in the South Asian scholarship. Even though they say they have words like post-colonial scholarship, subaltern scholarship, it really doesn't capture the essence of my life, right? You have a question like, can subalterns speak? Yes, subalterns can always speak. They have been always speaking since centuries. In fact, they are the ones who are speaking. But have you been able to understand their language? Are your ears open to their words and their life words? No, you understand it from your own point of view. So even if you listen to them, you don't understand. And there is no intent to understand. And that's why the kind of scholarship that comes out through it is very hollow. I don't really relate to most of that scholarship. And now we need to create a kind of a pipeline of scholarship, scholars, activists who come from that life world. And today's panel is kind of a testimony to that, how we reverberate with each other. We understand each other. So we need to create that pipeline of scholars who will come from that life world and theorize and talk about their own and you see, I imagine it happening in few decades from right now. And we are in that moment today, that where we create a scholarship which is completely different. We talk about our issues, right? So, and I think that's the point. And unless we put it forward to the world, you would still yeah.
I guess I want to reflect, echo the same thing that Ashad said, that when I was starting my comms, I was writing my candidacy paper. I remember telling my supervisor that the literature which is available, which is considered as academic publications, I'm not able to relate. I'm not able to find my own voices in that. I don't know what they're talking about, because when I read it, I don't find my own struggles or language that I associate with. And I remember explaining that I would like to rely on the other kind of knowledge which is out there, but not as academic publications. For example, poems and stories by Dalit women, or their autobiographies and everything. Or I heavily relied on personal communication. I went ahead and had a conversation with the Dalit women, because my research is about understanding the experiences of Dalit women in higher education and how their identity intersects with their learning experiences. So in order to understand their experiences, I need to hear their voices. I need to hear our voices. So reading papers by the, from the dominant, paper written by the dominant lens did not really offer any perspective that help us to go deeper into the caste issues and caste identity. So I really agree with what Ashad said here. Thank you so much.
Prem, do you want to go first, or?
Please, you can.
Okay, thank you. Because old professors are ranty. I just want to say three things, and hopefully very quickly. One of the things that's really important is, and this comes again from Dalit scholar Gopal Guru, who says that only Brahmins or people with caste are theoretical, whereas indigenous peoples, caste oppressed people, Dalits are there only to serve as the empirical data for these Brahmins or these Savarna scholars who then theorize us or write about our life conditions. So I think our entry into academia has really, and of course, my last name does not reflect my own caste positionality, because some of us have last names that are so attached to, that are so violent and attached to particular occupations that when we had an opportunity, again, this is a privilege that some of us were able to change our last name. So Patel is definitely not my caste. But, so even though, even with this last name, because of how we see the world, like Dalit feminism is an epistemological way and an ontological way of understanding the world and our beings and our place in it and afterlife and all of that. I think we really, really scare Savarna scholars. And the second thing that I wanted to say, based on what Ashad and Shikha were saying, is that it's one thing to make place for Dalit students in academia. It's another to treat them as your personal possessions, to say that I am not anti-Black. I have a Black friend. Look, they even text me, right? Like, this is how, we know, how we've been paraded at conferences. I'm so fortunate. I worked with indigenous scholars who were, who made all of this space for me. But I'm saying in general, I see how Savarna scholars pounce on Adivasi, indigenous to India, and Dalit students and treat them as their personal possessions. So I think it's really important to think about, what are the conditions that have been created for accepting Dalit students into academia? They are not there to serve as your empirical data. And unfortunately, this is how I see them being brought in. And, the last thing that I want to say about, citations is that Savarna citation practices are either really, really casteist in that they only cite each other. And so, that's what we say, that two Savarna scholars fighting about caste, at the end of the day, they're still kin. Whereas Dalit, no matter how friendly they are towards us, we will never be able to cross the threshold, whether it's a physical threshold of their, into their houses or, just in terms of knowledge production. So citation politics, one, do not cite only Savarna scholars. Two, think about how you cite Dalit scholars, Black scholars, indigenous scholars. We are not there to make your work less problematic. Show the world, the very troubling and very messed up upbringing and familial connections laid out in the open. If you want to see us, show us yours as well. And so these are the three things in relation to knowledge production that for me are really important sites of struggle in academia for Dalit scholars right now.
Prem?
So yeah, I do echo all the speakers who recently just now talked about that. So definitely I have nothing to say because Saita has talked a lot about that, and Asad also said, yes, definitely, you know, we need, you know, in knowledge production, so our representation matters. I just want to say that.
Thank you so much to each of you. We are out of time, but before we close out, Dr. DaCosta, do you want to have some final closing words?
I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, for everything that you have shared with us today, for the difficult, shameful for dominant caste people, shameful for Indians, stories that you shared with us today. Thank you for the inspiration. Thank you for the concrete ways in which you've asked us to do better. I have no doubt that much of what you've shared here will help us as we move forward. Thank you.
And thank you so much. And I want to thank each of our speakers for joining us today and offering, let's be clear, what are courageous interventions into these difficult, is it the conversation ought not to be difficult if we're in higher education, we are committed to education and literacy, but we know that the spaces in which we operate make some of us more vulnerable than others. And on this day of all days, we should not lose sight of that vulnerability, even in post-secondary education sector, but also the implications for some of us more than others who have to leave the university campus and go into the broader community. So I want to thank each of our speakers for what might be well understood as risky conversations. So thank you. And thank you to the audience for joining us from wherever you are joining us, to help us on this, in our efforts to advance discussions on caste-based discrimination in the school system, and especially in the post-secondary sector, where there are lots of liberal mythologies about openness to a diversity of ideas, to opportunities and inclusion and the like. And I wanted to thank, so thank you, Dr. DaCosta, for co-hosting these questions with me. And thank you to Dr. Carrie Smith and colleagues at University of Alberta for collaborating with me and my colleagues here at University of Calgary in advancing this conversation. And to say to our audience that this is a part of a series of conversation which we plan to host, to raise awareness and to educate around these issues, but ultimately to think through how we can be as successful and as and inspired as Prem and his colleagues in advancing this work, but all of the speakers who are doing this work on campuses. I mean, at the University of Calgary, we say this often, we are committed to removing barriers that have been and still are encountered by members of our community. These conversations are often reframed as courageous conversations, are integral to our efforts and to my efforts, my work to embed a more equitable, diverse, inclusive, and accessible campus. I could go on a riff about what I mean by diversity, but certainly it's not the generic performative gesture that many think about. This is about diversity. If we are committed to diversity, these conversations are part of that, these conversations. These voices and the voices that they reflect and amplify are part of those conversations. And the fact that we have to say it suggests to us that we actually have a long journey to go to think about how we think about that sticky word, diversity. So like Sarah Ahmed, we need to follow it around, the word, to see what it sticks to, where it journeys, and who gets excluded from that, even as we talk about inclusion. So these conversations must continue throughout our university life, in our research, in our teaching, in our learning, our work environment. So for more information on this collaboration between the University of Alberta and University of Calgary, please go to our website, and we will continue to add information on mitigating caste-based discrimination and any opportunity for further education and literacy work. So you go to ucalgary.ca/equity-diversity-inclusion and find the caste-based discrimination initiative page under the literacy and education drop-down menu. Thank you for joining us on this International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination for combating racism, discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerances. We hope to see you in the future. And thank you to our speakers for taking time to present and share with us today. Thank you to all.